Now, the Department of State Services, that's the DSS, has raised an alarm about plans by some elements working with external forces to incite religious violence across the country. According to a statement by the public relations officer of the service, some targeted states include Sokoto, Kano, Kaduna, Plateau, Rivers, Oyo, Lagos, and those in the southeast. The statements also noted that part of the plan is to cause inter-religious conflicts and use their foot soldiers to attack some worship centers, religious leaders, personalities, key and vulnerable points. The DSS advises Nigerians to be wary of these plans and shun all divisive tendencies aimed at inciting or setting them against one another, while pledging to collaborate with sister agencies to ensure that public order is being maintained. Well, joining me via Skype from Abuja is Security Risk Management Specialist, the Managing Director, Beacon Consulting Limited, Kabiru Adamu. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you. Good morning, Veronica, and Happy New Year.
Same to you. Now, let's begin this way. A lot of reactions have trailed this statement coming from the DSS. And this has to do with whether or not the DSS is supposed to inform Nigerians about this attempt to cause or incite interreligious crisis. I wonder where you stand with regards to this.
Yeah, it's very, very logical that question would arise. However, if one has an understanding of the two major documents that guide national and defense policy in Nigeria, which is the National Defense Policy and the National Security Strategy, then one will understand that the two major and overarching objectives of the two policies is one, to serve as deterrence, and then secondly, to be offensive. So to that extent, one would see that statement by the DSS as probably serving the deterrence element. In other words, put out that warning so that those who perhaps may be planning what the DSS is alleging would now know, okay, yes, the DSS is aware, and if we continue, they're going to arrest us. On the other hand, it could also be an indication that, well, the DSS has intelligence about the plan, but it doesn't have the complete picture. In other words, who are behind it and all that. So put it out there so that those who are planning it would make some mistakes, and then they would use those reactions to identify them and then hopefully arrest them. But on the whole, these are, as it were, the principles within which the National Defense Policy and National Security Strategy relies upon.
But some would say that a similar alert was given last year. You would recall that we had this same interview where there was an alert given by the DSS of an impending attack in Abuja, and one of the suburbs was attacked eventually, despite the alert. And so how do you expect them to move from this point, talking about the DSS now, acting on this information to ensure that it really serves as a deterrent and this issue is tackled?
Yes, there are two, what I would call tectonic plates upon which the Nigerian nation lies. Our ability to manage those tectonic plates actually to a larger extent determines whether we're secure or we're insecure. That is religion and ethnicity. They, as it were, our strength and also could be our failures. Now, around the new year, the Bishop of, I think, Sokoto, Archdiocese, Reverend Kuka, issued a statement that became very controversial. In fact, some group accused him of prompting or encouraging a coup attempt. Now, the fact that we are not aware that he's been invited by the DSS or any of the security agencies, now unfortunately speaks to that fact that this element, religion, needs to be handled carefully. So if it's true that there are people attempting to incite religious violence, by targeting certain religious places in certain states, then of course the responsibility lies squarely on the DSS and other security agencies to not only arrest those people, but then to present the facts and evidence to Nigerians in a transparent manner, so that we don't fall victims of these two tectonic plates that I've mentioned. If you recall, the civil war to a larger extent was fought along that line. The coup supposedly targeted certain persons of ethnic background, and then the resultant consequences was what happened between 1967 and 1970. We don't want that to repeat itself at this point in time.
Now, is this issue now, from what you have said, because the DSS is saying that this information is to ensure that Nigerians are at alert and also not to engage in divisive activities. Let's look at the stakeholders now, the key role, the roles they play. How critical are they to ensuring that this alert is ensure that it doesn't come to play? How can perhaps the DSS engage them, talking about religious leaders now? Because like you have rightly pointed out, these are very sensitive issues that a lot of Nigerians do not like to joke with, if I may use that word.
Certainly. So let's ask ourselves, who are the stakeholders? For me, the number one stakeholders are the political politicians, our political office holders. They have the responsibility to manage our disparate coexistence. We have to accept the fact that we're divergent, we're different, but we also have to accept the fact that we have a lot of uniting factors, and it is the responsibility of the politicians to manage those divergent elements in a manner that allows a peaceful coexistence. So that's number one. The second stakeholders are the religious leaders. And unfortunately, in the recent past, some statements by some of our religious leaders have been rather divisive. And I mean, with all sense of responsibility, I would want to issue like a caution here. If you look at historically, anytime religious leaders attempt to foray into the area of politics, then the consequences, unfortunately, are usually disastrous. So I think there is a need for that particular segment, our religious leaders as stakeholders, to be very mindful of the fact that they represent constituencies and that those constituencies listen to them. So whenever they are making statements that could be controversial, they should manage that very well so that the consequences does not lead, as it were, to a further division and breakdown of law and order. Then, of course, the media, they are, very important stakeholders. How we manage the information that are released, as it were, by the two first stakeholders that I mentioned, it's also critical. If we use languages that are divisive in reporting some of these statements, and it will also lead to further, as it were, breakdown of law and order. And then lastly, the Nigerians themselves, we as Nigerians, including civil society organizations, what we would call ordinary Nigerians, how do we respond to this statement? Do we respond to them first as stakeholders in terms of the constituencies we represent without tolerating the views of the other side? So I would advocate three things: diversity, inclusion, and then empowerment. If we're able, as Nigerians, all of these stakeholders, starting from the politicians, the religious leaders, media, and of course, civil society organizations and ordinary Nigerians, advocate these elements of tolerance, diversity, inclusion, and empowerment. And I think it would reduce the consequences, as it were. But for the security organizations who have the responsibility for law enforcement, we've always talked about our criminal justice system that is failing to apprehend offenders and punish those offenders. They have that responsibility. When infractions occur, yes, it's good to issue out such warnings, but it's more important to ensure that you arrest those that are behind those plans so that it is seen by others as an action that when you do wrong, then you're going to be arrested, and then of course you'll be prosecuted. And once you're prosecuted, then that deterrence element is introduced.
And this leads me to the next question, because the DSS is saying that it is pledging to collaborate with sister agencies to ensure that public order is maintained. What do you see? What picture do you see with regards to this aspect?
That's a very good promise, but then over time, we have talked about the pure absence of coordination within the national security architecture. There are about 27 ministries and departments within the national security architecture. And if they all cooperate and work together as one to achieve a single objective, then we'll be. If, however, we don't see enhanced cooperation, then unfortunately we would come back here and be discussing this. Now, it's fine for the DSS to make that promise, but what changes are we likely to expect within the national security architecture that will allow that kind of coordination? It is not within the power of the DSS to make those kind of changes. Those changes require policy redirection. They require the effort of both the executive and the legislative arm of government, as well as the leadership of these 27 ministries, departments, and agencies. So I'm hoping that it's not just a promise. I'm hoping that we'll see action along the lines of some of the things I've mentioned, including the effort of the major coordinating elements within the national security architecture. That's the Office of the National Security Advisor, the Presidency, the Minister of Interior, or Minister of Interior as the case is, the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Police Affairs. Clearly, these are not levels of coordination that can be influenced by the DSS, but it's good that we're hearing that promise from them. So I'm hoping that these 5 coordinating elements that I've mentioned will take it up as a matter of responsibility and ensure that the structure and infrastructure for coordination will be enhanced. Now, to that extent, I'm happy that the Office of the National Security Advisor is establishing an intelligence fusion center, as it were. That's a directive that has been given by Mr. President a couple of years ago, but the structure, the office allowed that is about to be established. So I'm hoping that the DSS will key into that, as well as all the other 26 ministries, departments, and agencies involved in security. That's the only way that we will achieve the kind of synergy and cooperation that is expected within the intelligence community.
Now, let me take you back to a statement you made earlier, talking about the unity, which is something that the president also harped on in his New Year message, talking about the fact that the unity of Nigeria and Nigerians is not negotiable, so to speak. And he also talked about the aspect of the civil war, which a lot of persons have said that not much is being done with regards to ensuring that people heal from the experiences. Do you think that perhaps that is still coming to play with what we see happening and with regards to this issue? The fact that people haven't healed from incidences of the past and efforts to ensure that there is this integration not really doing justice to ensuring that this unity that we talk about is not really negotiable.
President on New Year Day, was quite, as it were, calling for, enhanced unity. But then let's also remember that
all right, we have to leave the conversation here now. Security risk management specialist. All right, Kabir Adamu, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, you were trying to make a point.
Yes, I was saying that one of the things that the president is being accused of is nepotism, and the reality is it may be a perception. Because, the data, as it were, breakdown of appointments by the president across the various regions of the country, south and west, and it's clear that there is some form of balance, but the reality is that there is a perception by a significant percentage of Nigerians that there is nepotism under the Buhari administration. So there is a need to address that through concrete efforts that would allow and reduce this perception of marginalization. Now, one of the critical elements is the requirement by the Southeast to produce a president, and clearly they have stated it. But then how do we achieve that? And I think it's the responsibility of both the Southeast as well as all of us as Nigerians to ensure that that is achieved through a very transparent transition process that would allow anyone who merits it to have a stake. Now, if that person, as it were, is given the opportunity and then he fails to achieve it, then the essence will not be that of national unity, but failure from that particular region. So to that extent, I think the political parties have a responsibility to be more democratic, to allow a transparent process for the emergence of their flag bearers. And that, I think, would go a long way towards reducing this perception of marginalization or or non-representation from certain parts of the country. But remember my point earlier on about the need to balance these our very divergent coexistence. And I think the importance is for politicians to ensure that this balance is achieved. And if statements like the ones made by Mr. President are beginning point, then I would say that that's the right way to go.
All right, so let's leave the conversation here now. Security Risk Management Specialist and Managing Director, Beacon Consulting Limited, Kabir Adamu, thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.